the last discussion or last presentation this morning is from Meyer, who's with the Spokane Conservation District, and was I think he put together the conference on regenerative agriculture that SCD had last autumn. And regenerative agriculture is probably the hottest idea in environmental management today. So we are really fortunate to have Meyer talk about regenerative agriculture.
Okay, thank you, John. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and talk to you about something that's pretty exciting to us. This is one of those things that we don't think we get many opportunities to do, and this is to change the direction of a pretty major industry in our region. And Aaron talk to you about the importance of agriculture, and so we're pretty engaged in that process right now, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk through it. So this is about regenerative agriculture. You can advance a slide. This is an interesting point that we really need to realize. We require in this country a good food product at a fairly low cost, a reasonable price, and that those populations actually require good food. We require more food each time, and because of that, we have to become efficient, right? The system has to become efficient and really provide good food. Next slide. And when we look at agriculture and nature, it's really an interesting concept, right? The Palouse prairies and things that we had out here, this is what I would anticipate those looking like. We have very few of them left. Next slide. And today we have pictures like this on the Palouse of our cropping systems, the amazing food production that we do on these acres. Next slide. And we have to realize a couple things about it, that some of the technology that we have today allows us to do things and in essence bypass some of the functions that nature provided in the past. So we saw those prairies, they were fully functional without some of the things we use today, and our cropping systems allow us sometimes to bypass what nature is able to do. And because of those technologies, that last point's pretty important. We've become pretty efficient at growing high yielding and good quality crops. It really helped us advance the system. Next slide. And so it's important to think about where we came from when the prairies were broken and things around here. And then we got tractors, and even before that, when we had the horse-drawn plows and things on the Palouse and this region. What was that all about? I mean, we were growing our own nitrogen. We were growing a nutrient crop to plow down and use to grow the next crop. So that was a pretty efficient system. They grew clover, they plowed it under, and that led to some high quality food products. We had a lot of local food production and processing in our region. Next slide. And then we look at this graphic, and this tells you what that system did for us. The advent of technology, advancements in our system. This is a slide that shows U.S. wheat production in bushels per acre. What happened over a 70, 80 year period with the advent of synthetic fertilizers and things that really helped us. All of a sudden we didn't have to grow that nitrogen. So all of a sudden we doubled our acreage available for crop production on the Palouse in this region. We didn't have to have 1 year set aside to grow the nutrients. We were able to put it on. And it was highly efficient and still is a highly efficient system. Next slide. And then some of these slides you'll see in the bottom right are from Kiss the Ground. I'd like to know who's seen the video Kiss the Ground. Anybody out there? Okay, perfect. It's one worth watching. It's a very good overview of the transition to regenerative ag. There you go. You'll get your opportunity today if you want to watch it. And so I had the opportunity to go through what they call a soil advocate training because I wanted to hear what they had to say about our regenerative ag systems in the world. And so this is really interesting. They call it runaway fertilizer use. It really ramps up, right? And we have to start realizing, is there some impact to that? And we can see it throughout time and history as some of those fertilizers ramp up, and so does our productivity, and the industry builds and efficiency gains, and so we start to see some higher in the country. Next slide. And then we introduced glyphosate. Aaron talked about it. I wanted to thank Aaron. He hit 2 or 3 of my major points. So I could have been up here with Aaron and we could have been doing a joint kind of discussion on this, because there's some real benefits to this. And so that's kind of a little bit of a depiction of glyphosate use in our country. Next slide. That was 2016, and it starts to show you the use of it. And this, I'm not up here to condemn the use of glyphosate at all. I totally agree with Aaron. This is the single tool that transformed conservation agriculture in the world, by far. It enabled us to get rid of heavy tillage and plows and those kind of things, and now we learn more, right? We're starting to learn about some of the potential impacts, and that's happening. And what's even more of an impact potentially to us is what that may be doing to the soil as well. So we're starting to learn those things, and it's evolving as we go. Next slide. And with those highly efficient systems came some of these things, right? We started to do some pretty heavy tillage and things in areas where we weren't using conservation tillage. We saw some of these impacts. We saw erosion. We saw, some sedimentation in the streams and things, and those are impacts that we're constantly trying to address in agriculture. So the conservation tillage part of this, the direct seed and no-till component, really is aimed right at those components, is to really try to address those issues. Next slide. But what we found is that some of our industrialized agriculture systems, we're really in somewhat of a degenerative system. That system, in some regards, is eroding the ability of our soil to actually produce for us. So we've taken away some of the natural biological components of the soil by putting synthetics on it. The soil doesn't have to be as active, so it doesn't do quite the same job that it did in the past. And so in some regards, we're kind of in a downhill slope in some of these regions and areas. Next slide. And then you look at what's happening around the world. We've got desertification happening. 1/3 of the farmable land has been lost in the last 40 years. Okay, around the world. Okay, next slide. 75% of the land is considered to be in a degraded state. Okay, so this is the large macro impacts of potential large industrialized agriculture systems and things, and that's been driven out of the need for efficiency and higher food production and those kind of things. And so we have to be aware of what we as society ask of agriculture, because we have to become efficient and do these things. Now, we've got other things we can do to address this. Next slide. You start to see that some of those impacts. Aaron had a couple slides on this exact thing. We can lose in the Palouse region on our hills 4 tons of topsoil per acre per year. So they say that a ton of soil is the thickness of 1 dime over an acre. That's 1 ton. So we're losing potentially 4 of those per year to water erosion when we're doing heavy tillage systems. Next slide. Then you saw this, potentially the wind erosion as well, right? You could lose a potential another 4 tons out there, depending on how your soil is taken care of. Go to the next one, and this is the same slide. I'm glad Aaron didn't have the exact same slide in, because this is the same day that Aaron had in his slide from out there in Ritzville. Pardon? Okay, you're 3 hours later. This is what's amazing to me is that when we look at wind erosion impacts, we think of the Dust Bowl age. Instantly, that's where my mind goes, that we will never have to deal with that again because we dealt with some of those issues and challenges. But this was 2014, right in our backyard, right? And we see some of those impacts. And so we have a challenge ahead that we get to work on and fix. Next slide. So what's the reality of all this? We've gradually been degrading that soil ecosystem over the last 50 years. Our farm input costs are going up. Aaron had a great slide on that. You saw the doubling, tripling of prices from fertilizers to chemistries that are being used. Our net farm income is going down over the years. We're in this mentality of get big or get out. We're no different. It's like the scalability of business. If you want to make more money in agriculture, we're in this model of skimming less margin off more acres. So you get big or you're going to get out. And then we have a rural impact, rural community impact. And this is one that is, I think we can all see it. You can go drive through rural communities today and wonder where all the businesses went and the local stores and things. And we've had this transition and largely part of the industrialized ag movement because we've figured out that we can be highly efficient, we can ship things in, we can ship things out, and we don't need to go through the local communities. So we've had a massive impact on our rural community, the economics of those. Next slide. So what's the solution? Yeah, next slide. It's our soil, plain and simple. There's one answer to this, and we can solve it with our soil. Next slide. So we've started the process. We've got producers in the region that are absolutely addressing this. They're out here working on new ways of implementing farming systems in our region that are focused on this exact thing. How do we rebuild our soil? Next slide. One of the things that's very interesting to realize is that because of some of the things that occurred in agriculture with desertification, some of our systems that leave, I call it a brown cycle. We have about a 4 to 5 month green period in our region where we seed a lot of crops in the spring, everything greens up and it stays green, and then about August time it starts to dry down and we go through our harvest. We plant fall wheat in the fall, so we get another little bit of a green up period, but all the rest of the ground stays brown through the winter. And we've seen this impact, and what that's done is had a massive impact on our small water cycles. What happens in our region for rain and things can be impacted by the heat that's stored in the ground that's bare. And that has a major impact on our water cycles. And we can change that. Next slide, please. So we talk about regenerative agriculture. This is quickly and ever evolving right now. 2 years ago, there was 3 principles. Last year, there's 4. Now there's 5, and I just heard the other day there's 6 principles of regenerative ag, and so try to keep up of what we're doing with this. But there's these 5 core principles, and they really, truly apply to our region. And we're working with a lot of producers to do this. Next slide. The principle 1 is low disturbance. This is what the program I run at the Conservation District. We have a loan program to help farmers buy direct seed and no-till equipment. This is the concept. Aaron showed you a picture of a no-till drill. This is the body of work that I've had. Probably I've been at the district 18 years working on direct seed and no-till with farmers. And this is one of the keys. And we thought up until about 2 years ago, I thought this, I think most of our farmers thought this, that if we could get most of our farmers in the region to adopt a direct seed and no-till system, we will have arrived at a pretty amazing place. We will have done a lot. We would have covered the ground. We've addressed some wind erosion. We're starting to change our soil. And then we found out that there's 5 principles to regenerative agriculture. And all this stuff is starting to come up here, and we're learning. And so let's go to the next slide. And principle 2 is crop diversity. So we found out that the direct seed and no-till was only one leg of, 2 years ago, a 3-legged stool, now 5, right? That one of the core principles we have to do. Without that one, we're likely not going to achieve these others. So the crop diversity, we're using cover crops. We're going to find that over time, those are going to become a necessity, I believe, in this system. We will use a crop that's very diverse, anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 different plants at a time on a field to start producing our own nutrients. We know there's a synergy between those plants to help develop microbiology in the soil, that biological ecosystem. We need research plots on some of this stuff. The crop rotations, we believe, are going to be lengthened from 2 to 3 year rotations of winter wheat, spring wheat, and garbanzo beans on the Palouse, or lentils and peas, to something that includes a cover crop to try to extend that diversity out. And then we're looking at other bioamendments and other strategies. Biochar could be a strategy and one of the tools in our toolbox to do that, to help us achieve it. Next slide. Principle 3, keeping the soil covered. Aaron talked about this. We absolutely have to keep something on the ground to make this happen. Gabe Brown, if you're familiar with him, the producer in South Dakota, North Dakota, one of them out there. He's the leading, I would say, producer in the nation on regenerative agriculture right now. If you want to hear somebody talk about regenerative agriculture, YouTube Gabe Brown. You'll hear somebody that has stacked revenue enterprises on a regenerative farm. I think he's got 17 profit centers in his farm now. And he's doing it all under regenerative practices with virtually no synthetics on the farm. Unbelievable story, and it can be done. We think, in our region, we can absolutely use cover crops for that critical period where I talked about that brown cycle where our ground isn't growing anything. I believe there's a place for it, but we have to figure out how to do it. Our system is a little different than the Midwest. In the Midwest, they can put cover crops right into a growing corn crop because they have rain all summer long throughout the cycle, and they grow right up through the corn crop, and when they harvest the corn, they've got a beautiful green cover crop underneath it to grow through the winter. We don't have that ability. We don't have any rain cycle from June 20th, the June 15th till likely October 1st that would actually germinate anything for us. If we're lucky, we get a good September shot of rain and could germinate something. But that's a challenge for us. Next slide. Number 4, the living root in the soil. This is a key. This is part of the diversity piece. We have to have a very diverse crop system. The middle point here, we need a lot of research on this. We have to be able to find cover crop varieties that will grow in our Mediterranean climate. Again, with the lack of moisture throughout our major heat cycle, where the Midwest gets a lot of moisture during their heat cycle and they have a lot of growing degree days all day, all night. We don't have that potentially, and so we need research on that. We have to find those right varieties to do this, but it's absolutely integral to transitioning to a regenerative ag system that we figure out how to keep a living plant on our ground all the time. When a crop comes off, we need to figure out how to get one right back on it and get that ground back to producing something, getting a living root on it and making it happen. The economics of it. On the farm side, Aaron had a great, if you look at the cost that goes into agriculture today and the amount of money that's spent to try to grow and produce crops, we need the economics on this too. We absolutely have to have and see success in putting these cover crops out there and analyzing the economics of using those. How long does it take us to realize an economic benefit of putting a cover crop on the ground and see it in hopefully in reduced synthetic nutrients and things we need down the road. Next slide. And the last one is the integration of livestock. This is an unbelievable positive impact on our soil. Those are mobile composting machines. Those things, they will do everything we need to do. It's like putting compost out there. They can get it done for us. Next slide, please. And so we have a biofarming program at the district that works with a group of farmers, like-minded individuals searching for a new path, we have a few sideboards on that program, and to be part of that first group we have, you had to acknowledge that there's another way. And these aren't small farmers. We have about 15 in the first group that represent about 100,000 acres in the region, so they control a lot of acres of ground. They're large producers. We're not talking small trials. We didn't allow any naysayers in the room. We don't have the time, mental capacity, and desire to deal with people that want to buck the system, because we know where we have to go. We just don't know quite how to get there. And so we're working through that system. And you got to be willing to ask those tough questions about yourself and the operation and where we're going. Next slide. And our approach is to really change that traditional thinking from that industrial system to regenerative ag. Next, please. To educate producers on why we've seen some of the depletion of our soil. Next slide. And to help people understand the system we're in. It is a massive system. Our food system, from the farm clear to the consumer, is an unbelievably efficient system. And so we have to figure out within that system how we can work and change that portion that we can control that will really benefit the farm and hopefully the better food product coming out the end. Next slide. This is, I liken this to, it's like Back to the Future, right? We're trying to be able to kind of rewind the clock and go back to where we were 75 years ago, where we were growing our own nutrients, except we're in a very efficient and built system now, right? And so we're trying to figure that out. How do we get back there, grow some of our nutrients again, try to get back to some higher margins on our farm, healthier soil and plant, more nutritious food coming off of these farms. And it can absolutely happen. It's happening on farms around the country right now. And we can do this. That last point, revitalizing rural America. Let's get some people back in rural America that are excited about what they do. I'll tell you that personally, this is one of the most exciting things in my career I've ever gotten the ability to deal with. To be able to get up every morning and realize that we have the ability in my lifetime to change the path and direction of what is going on with carbon, with greenhouse gases. It can all be done with the soil. We know that right now. We have to figure out how to do it. Next slide. And just some quick little pictures here. I'm going to flip through them quick here for you. Just a few things. We're using biologicals and micronutrients on our crops, putting them on. You can see a line in the field where we applied and where we didn't. The next slide. We're using intercropping. We're starting to think, instead of monoculture, about diverse crop rotations within the same cycle. 2 different crops, side by side, mutually working together, one providing nutrients for the other potentially, and trying to get a benefit out of having 2 crops in the field at once. Next. That can also provide a huge benefit for weed control while building healthy soils. The better crop coverage you have out there, it's covering the soil, suppresses weeds. We don't need as much chemistry potentially at that point to deal with some of the weed issues. Next slide. And then you look at the diversity of it. The pollinators that are out there, the benefit of bringing insects back to the farm and helping us build healthier plants and crops. There's a huge benefit of that diverse cover crop mix. Next slide. Farming is one of the only industries that purchases every input at retail and sells every product at wholesale. Right? I mean, what else can you say? We pay retail for every input, and every product we sell goes to a wholesale market for the most part. Now, the goal of this program, next slide here, is something with what we're working on right now. There's a Farmsmart Certification. Our district runs this program. This is go ahead and advance the slide, please. 36 different criteria that a farm can go through. This is a regenerative ag labeling that allows a farm to go through all these criteria that address water quality, air quality, soil quality, wildlife habitat, and on down. And these, we have farms in the region doing this, and it's a very high bar, but they've achieved a tremendous amount of success on their farms in terms of whole farm adoption of conservation. We're not picking a single practice and saying, go do that to help solve a problem. We're saying it's a holistic approach across your farm to really help this. And with that, we're working to build better markets for those commodities. That should be a higher value product to everyone out here. You vote every day with your dollar what you buy. So this is where it becomes important. Those things that you see in the market where you go out and you support things like this as you see it, as we get it available on the shelf. Next slide, please. Go ahead. This is one of the few programs in the nation. 6 years ago, we signed a letter of agreement of MOU with the Washington State Department of Ecology that anybody goes through this program, any farm, meets water quality regulations and requirements in the state of Washington. So this is one of the very few. This was the first that we know of in the nation when we signed this agreement. There's a couple others across the country now that have done similar types of programs with their regulatory agencies. We believe this is a really big component of this because it helps the farmers differentiate themselves from others for doing a high level of adoption. So next slide. And this is it. This is changing that paradigm. Reducing some of our reliance on some of our synthetics, growing our nutrients on the farm, and revitalizing our rural communities and local food production. So with that, I would take any questions, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you. Good.